Hey friends, it's Mike. It's Saturday, September 14th, 2019, and around 2 p.m. here on the East Coast. I wanted to do this video to catch everybody up on where I'm at with wrapping up my ongoing research in the whole Paul is dead McCartney conspiracy arena. The first thing is I want to thank everyone, all of my subscribers, my listeners, all of my friends for their very positive feedback and comments with regard to the recent show that we did, the Memoirs Roundtable with Melinda, Wendy, and Vicky. I want to thank the ladies for their participation because, as I have said so many times, there are so many good people that are looking into this whole McCartney conspiracy, very smart people, and you got a taste of three of those folks during that show, and really it was a delight to have them on and to ask them the questions that were asked and to get their insights. So again, I want to thank the ladies for coming on, and I want to thank my audience for the positive feedback. A lot of folks have asked me about Richard Balducci. When is Richard going to come back? Richard and I sat down about a week ago or so, and that was a 5-hour discussion that we had that was recorded. So we have 5 hours of material. Richard gave us the mother lode of occult information as it pertains to the Beatles. And because it's 5 hours, it's going to take me time to divide up the 5 hours. I'm not going to put it out as one 5-hour show. People will just glaze over. So what I'm going to do is put it out in parts. So you'll have part 1, 2, 3, and most likely a part 4. Part 1 will come out the very end of this month to the very early part of October, and parts 2, 3, and 4 will go out through December. Okay, so you'll have something to look forward to from a Paul is Dead perspective on the channel from Richard going out through December. I am currently working on the presentation with a small team of other researchers taking a look into whether the Beatles wrote all of their own music. The key word there is all. I'm not saying the Beatles didn't write any of their music. I'm not saying the Beatles were the Monkees. I'm just taking a look at whether the Beatles wrote all of their own music. And we're going to get into that in a little bit here. I'll explain some more about what was the driver that really piqued my interest to take a look at that piece of the conspiracy. All right, so if we just hold on a second, I'll get back to that. I'm going to be doing a show with Vince Russo, so I'll be back with Vince in November. Vince asked me to come back on to talk about my Paul is Dead journey, the ups, the downs, and everything in between, and I told Vince I would be delighted to do that. So we had a great conversation when he had me on the first time, and then I invited him onto my show to talk about the wrestling business. That was a fabulous discussion, so I'm really looking forward to that. I have been contacted by other podcasters and radio show hosts to come on. I will do some additional shows where I will talk about my journey and talk about my insights into the conspiracy. I won't be doing a flood of shows. I will be selectively choosing what platforms that I will be having these discussions with. I was contacted by 2 large terrestrial radio stations or shows. One I think I might have mentioned. I won't say who they are, but one was a few months ago, and it's very, very large. And I declined to go on the show because when they emailed me, they said they wanted me to come on to talk about the McCartney hoax. And that was a tip-off that this was going to be a possible setup, what we refer to up in the Northeast in New York as a sandbag. And so I told him that I wasn't interested, and I was dialoguing email with the producer of that particular radio show, and he couldn't believe that I turned it down. But the reason I did was because I did not get a good feeling about it. And then about a week ago, I was contacted by a very large morning show out of Chicago, and they asked me to come on to talk about why it is that Paul McCartney's face had changed so much. And so I wrote them back, and again, this is the producer of the show, and I said, well, how much does the host know about my work, and how long a segment are you talking about? And so they wrote me back, again, this is the producer, and said, well, I'm pretty sure he's aware of your work because he asked for you specifically, and the segment would be 5 minutes. So first of all, he didn't answer the question. I was very specific. How much did that host know about my work? So the response coming back saying, well, I think he probably knows about you because he asked. that doesn't really cut it, right? And 5 minutes. I mean, you can't take this conspiracy and boil it down to 5 minutes. That's ridiculous. So I told him thank you, but no thank you. So that was that. So it is getting attention, even if it's attention from those that want to try to debunk it. It means that the word is getting out there. And I probably should mention this. I went back and took a look at my shows, and I counted up all of the listens and the views over all of my platforms. So that would include this channel, my main channel. I have a backup main channel. I've got DTube and BitChute and Mixcloud and Spreaker. And the count, which excludes where my shows have been embedded in other websites across the world, is over 1 million. So it's over 1 million views and listens over a 3-year period of time. So again, people are interested in this topic. So again, I want to thank the 1 million plus people for taking a listen. It's greatly appreciated. Now, the next piece that I want to talk about is research versus dogma, and I'll explain this in a little bit. So, and I'll tie it into the 1 million views, and also more specifically into my announcement that I was going to look into as my final presentation as to whether the Beatles wrote all of their own music. And again, to reiterate, I'm not saying the Beatles are the Monkees. I'm not saying the Beatles didn't write any of their music. I'm questioning whether the Beatles wrote all of their own music. And so when I announced this, there was a segment of the Paul is Dead community, which includes researchers and people that are engaged in the community, that went absolutely nuts over me making this announcement, as if it was some kind of heresy that I should not look into something like this. Because by doing this, I was cutting across some grain, some unwritten rule that this is not something you should ever do if you're doing Paul is Dead research. Well, my take on it is research, right? So you go where the research takes you. And if you have certain suspicions because something else led you to have a thought that perhaps something needs to be looked at or that something needs to be pursued, then you do that. You don't sit there and say, well, I don't want to look at that because if I look at that, then that's going to taint my view of what I want to believe about the Beatles. And so once you get into believing a narrative or believing a storyline, then what happens is you've actually entered into the land of dogma. And it's no longer research. For some people, it goes as far as putting them to the point where they are evangelizing a particular narrative. It's like a religion. It becomes a religion to them. So when I made this announcement, like I said, there were some that actually went nuts over this. And they became very vocal. They attacked me personally. They attacked the book, of course. That goes without saying. Their behavior has turned off an enormous amount of people. So as I said, I was going to look into this piece of the conspiracy, this particular thread. There were people in the community, that small piece of the pie, that were saying that I was doing this because Memoirs states this in the book, that the Beatles didn't write their own music. And that's completely false. False. Memoirs does not state that at all. Memoirs never even comes close to saying something like that. It's not in the book. It's not in the red book. It's not in the blue book. It's not there. And the other piece of this is that they tie in that Memoirs says that Theodore Adorno wrote the Beatles' music. Also false. Since Memoirs never talks about the Beatles not writing their own music, why would Memoirs say that, first of all, right? Because that would say that Billy didn't write his own music. And I know there are people out there that believe that Billy got help too, all right? But the book just simply does not go down that road. It doesn't talk about it at all. And since it doesn't talk about that, it's also not going to talk about Theodore Adorno being involved with writing the Beatles' music. Okay, so I'm going to show you the book that does talk about that. It's not Memoirs. It's this book. It is the book by Dr. John Coleman, The Committee of 300, a fabulous book. Dr. Coleman gets into the Committee of 300, which is the committee that runs the world. Now, Billy does talk about the Committee of 300 in the Memoirs of Billy Shears as a major component of the pyramid of power. And this book goes back to the early 1990s. I believe it was 1992. And he talks about Tavistock. He talks about the Beatles being a Tavistock creation. He talks about Theodore Adorno being the brainchild, the mastermind behind the Beatles' music and lyrics. Okay? It's this book. Dr. Coleman's work into the Committee of 300 and exposing who they are. In fact, he says that we no longer have to refer to them as they, as some unknown entity. He names names. He tells you who everybody is in the Committee of 300, going back to the 1990s. Obviously, some people have passed away and others have filled those slots, but a lot of those people are still alive. It was perplexing to a lot of folks when Dr. Coleman came out with this book, because most of the book, 98% of it, people were looking at it amazed with the wealth of information and how much he exposed. But then when he got to the Beatles, people went into cognitive dissonance. They just couldn't go there, right? Oh, well, 98% of the book is just spot on. But that 2% that he talks about the Beatles and Tavistock, that just can't possibly be. People don't want to go there. And people don't want to go there because, the Beatles became a religion to so many. People idolized them, worshiped them. I did. I learned to write music by listening to Beatle music. I learned recording techniques by reading books on Beatle recording techniques. I was a disciple of the Beatles, and I have a Beatle vinyl collection, 33 RPM, 45s, that probably rivals a collection that anybody has. And I have one of the rarest Beatle records ever pressed. It's the Revolver album on the Capital Red Bullseye label. Very, very sought after. And I have that. So I was knee deep into this. Up to, not even knee deep. I was way up above my eyeballs in Beatle worship. And so this was a very difficult process for me to go through. It was unbelievable. There were times when my brains were fried. I thought to myself, oh my God, I have been listening to the Beatles, playing Beatle music, learning from the Beatles ever since I was 8 or 9 years old. As I've mentioned on a number of shows, I remember very clearly wanting to go see Yellow Submarine in 1968. I was 9 years old, and I begged my father to take me there. So he took my brother and I know my father, it was very painful for him, but God bless his heart. He sat there for 90 minutes as my brother and I watched, disappointed because we didn't realize it was an animation. We were kids. And then when the Beatles came out at the end, which included Billy as Paul McCartney, that to me was worth the price of the ticket, just to see that 5 minutes at the end, So that's how much I was into it. Again, like I said, it was a hard pill for me to swallow. So the reason why I'm looking into this thread about whether the Beatles wrote their own music is not just because of this book, all right, because I've known about this book. It's interesting because you'll see on the internet blanket claims that Theodore Adorno wrote the Beatles' music, and then you can't find a source. You can never find a source because nobody ever says it was from John Coleman's book, right? So if you're interested, read this book. It's a great book. The Beatle pieces of it are on maybe 10 to 12 pages where he talks about Tavistock and Tavistock reporting into the Committee of 300. All right, so good book. But what really caught my interest was I was watching a documentary, and it was a documentary about the Beatles in the recording studio. And I'm not going to say what the documentary is. I will reveal that when I do the presentation that I'm looking to get out by the end of October. There was a timing issue. And as I was watching it, I noticed it like that. And a light bulb went off in my head. So what I did was I reached out to contacts of mine that are musicians, songwriters in the music industry, composers, arrangers, and I gave them the lay of the land. I said, hey, I was watching this. What do you guys and gals think? And that's what started it. Okay, that's what started it. So it's not something that came out of the memoirs of Billy Shears, because it's not in the memoirs of Billy Shears. All right, so I just want to make that clear to everybody, so that you are understanding of how this came about. You know, there's information that I put out there that has nothing to do with the memoirs of Billy Shears. When I came out and I talked about Street Paul as an example, that did not come out of the memoirs of Billy Shears. That piece of information where there was Performer Paul, which is primarily Billy, and then Street Paul, another primary replacement. And that's not to say that there weren't other doubles and lookalikes. There were that paged in and out, but two primary replacements, Performer Paul and Street Paul. That did not come out of memoirs. That came to me by a source that reached out to me that was in that attended a very high level soiree back in the 1990s that was attended by people in the military and technology industries. We call it the military industrial complex or the intelligence complex. And that's how that information was forwarded to me by a person that had firsthand knowledge and was engaged in this actual conversation. What I try to do is to stay neutral about Billy, and that's what a researcher should do. A researcher needs to stay neutral. Once you're not neutral and you lose your ability to be objective, you become subjective, and you're no longer in the realm of research anymore. Right? You become a partisan for whatever your belief system is, whatever your dogma is, and I won't do that. My job is, as a researcher, is to report my findings. That's what I'm there to do. You don't get anywhere by latching on to not liking Billy as an example, because as soon as you do that, you have an agenda. You may not like the information, but he's giving you nuggets, and a lot of nuggets of information that you can assess and review, that you can take and see if it pans out. In other words, you do additional research and you see, okay, does this lead anywhere? Is this information truthful? And as I've mentioned in so many shows, the memoirs of Billy Shears, from my standpoint, from my perspective, is truthful. And we mentioned this in the recent show, the Memoirs Roundtable. So what the book does is it gives you a foundation, and then it's up to you to take that foundational set of information, data points, and to validate or debunk, find more information. That's how I approach it. You know, some people say, well, you know, you're claiming that you're the first one to bring up the Crowley ties to the whole Beatles thing. And my response is, I never ever claimed to be the first person to ever point out that Aleister Crowley was tied in to the Beatles in a big, big way. That Aleister Crowley was tied into everything. Music industry, entertainment industry. I mean, he's a major player in the pyramid of power. His religion of Thelema, many in the Illuminati, that's their spiritual belief system, Thelema. It's Crowleyism. But what I was able to do was to take the Crowley piece of it and to put it in more plain speak so that more people can understand it. Yes, there are forums out there that go back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that talk about Crowley and his influence and his ties into the Beatles. But these forums had a very limited audience. Many of them today are idle and defunct. They haven't been updated in a decade. I Am a Phony, Billy Martin's channel, he has done a fabulous job on that channel. And I loved watching the I Am a Phony videos and the Rotten Apple series. But the thing is that the information with regard to the occult in those videos was very cryptic. So only somebody who was well-versed or fairly well-versed in the occult was going to get that information to understand what was being said. So I like to believe what I did was I made it more appealing to the general public. I took a lot of the cryptic stuff out and I presented what I believe to be more understandable to the average person so that they can get on board. You see? So in any case, the last thing I want to talk about is something called the Streisand effect. And I'll read to you what the Streisand effect is in a moment. But to those out there that continually attack me or attack Tom or attack memoirs, what you have to understand is that when you do that, you are raising awareness and you're driving demand for my shows. You're raising awareness and driving demand for people to read the memoirs of Billy Shears. Now, how do I know this? Because many, many people have written me over the last 3 years to tell me that when certain groups, small segments of the population, again, I want to state it's a small piece of the pie of the total Paul is dead, McCartney conspiracy community that behave this way. But when they do, they pique the interest of the person that they're going after. So what happens is people will then say, oh, I'm going to go check out this Mike Williams guy and his Paul is dead material. Let me go to his channel and see what he's talking about. And then they come here and they listen to it and they think, well, all right, I mean, this sounds very reasonable to me. He doesn't sound like a lunatic. I may not agree with everything he's saying, but I mean, at least it's even keel. It's civil discourse. Doesn't seem to be some kind of nut job behind the microphone, talking about this stuff. The other thing that they're doing is that they are alienating themselves. So there are people that would go to those pages and looking to learn more and then see this dialogue taking place, this very ugly, nasty, attacking dialogue. And they split. The good people split. They leave. They're like, what is this? And really what's unfortunate about this whole thing is that the people that are engaging in this negative behavior and activity, they're in the years of adulthood and they just cannot raise the bar on this thing. I mean, they're just hunkered down and it's very heavy and it's, as I said, it's ugly, it's nasty, it's just dense stuff and people don't want to be there. What they should do, especially those that are trying to promote their own narrative, is they should take all the energy that they're spending on attacking memoirs. You're putting energy into something that is not well spent. My recommendation would be that if you have a narrative that differs from memoirs or differs from mine, then you should dedicate your time and energy to your narrative. And by doing that, what's going to happen is you're going to have more success to get your ideas out to the public. More people will listen to you. These folks have spent an enormous amount of time attacking me, and while they were doing that and not growing their own presence, I have over 1 million listens and views in 3 years. Think about that. And they've actually enabled my ability to achieve the 1 million listens and views over 3 years. And I'll say it again, I know this because people have written me so many times to tell me this. So my recommendation is that you spend time on your own business. Build your platforms. Build your YouTube channel. Get a better presence on other platforms. Do a better job of presenting your material. Do a better job of selecting who it is that is going to be your host or who the podcaster is, so that your message is articulated in a better way. I don't know. It just seems to me like they're just missing the boat, and I'm trying to help you here. I really am, because I'm not in this game to be a guru. I'm not in this game to be the leader of Paul is dead or the McCartney conspiracy. I mean, that whole thing is ridiculous, just absolutely ridiculous. I'm just a guy that decided that he was going to look into this and has spent 3 years doing so. And then this guy has decided that I've done all I can do with it on an ongoing basis. It's at a point of diminishing returns. And so I'm going to step out and I'm going to look at other things. I mean, recently, shows that are coming up on my main channel are going to be with Sophia Smallstorm, Emily Moyer, Beverly Blass, Kara St. Louis, Neil Sanders. Just a bunch of good stuff coming up that has nothing to do with this. Nothing to do with the McCartney conspiracy. So let me just read to you about the Streisand effect. And this is what the folks that are attacking are engaging in. And this is why everything is backfiring on them. This is why they cannot get traction. This is why they're still mired down in the mud and they can't get their nostrils above the waterline. Okay, so here's the Streisand effect. The Streisand effect is a phenomenon whereby an attempt to hide, remove, or censor a piece of information has the unintended consequence of publicizing the information more widely usually facilitated by the internet. And that's it. That's exactly what's going on. Okay, so I just received a PM this morning from a person on Facebook and said, Mike, I don't understand why there's so much chaos and disunity in the Paul is Dead community. I mean, why can't people just behave themselves? And I said, I don't know. I don't engage in that type of behavior, and I won't. I let it go. Sometimes, if it's really bad, I will reach out to the person who has done something that I believe is really underhanded, and I will say, I don't know why you're engaging in this. Let's do the right thing. Let's be mature about this. Let's be an adult about this, and let's get the train back on the track. All right, folks, I don't want to sound too preachy, but I needed to talk about this stuff mostly because many people have reached out to me and asked me why I don't talk about it some more. And one of the reasons why I don't talk about it is because it's just nasty. It's ugly stuff, and I don't want to be ugly toward people. I don't want to be nasty toward people. I believe that we need to be good to each other, do no harm, and coexist. I mean, if we don't agree, if we don't see eye to eye on things, that's okay. That's part of the human experience. But the whole piece of where you're going to try to vilify people and attack them, that's bad stuff. It's not good. Okay, so that's it. The comment section is down below, and we'll talk soon. Bye now.